the West End, as regards shoemaking, wouldn't be the same without Lob at all.
Yeah.
And they should be credited for that because they've trained so many people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's a sweet spot where you can hit and it just looks right.
What they say is buy less but buy better. Mm-hmm. And if we can all do that, and you know, if people don't use us, we'll die out. You know?
Yeah, indeed.
And I think there's more of an appreciation, isn't there? That,
I think that's what's changed.
These trades are worth supporting.
So today is a very exciting video. I'm here at 11 St. George's Street in London, right across from the St. George's Chapel. And we are at Burn & Burge here with two absolutely legendary shoemakers that really together constitute a pretty significant swath of history here in just West End shoemaking. I've got, of course, Dominic Casey, who needs no introduction to this channel, and Jim McCormack, known as probably one of the more or most legendary West End shoemakers, which I can say that you can't. But two exceptionally talented individuals, of course, who are standard bearers of quality craftsmanship and tradition. And so today's quite exciting. Of course, Dominic, you've made several pairs of shoes for me.
Yes,
You're a victim of your own success.
Yes.
In that you've become really quite busy these days.
I am,
and,
indeed,
And so whereas the first several pairs of shoes, you could say were totally bench made, where you did the last making, the pattern making, the clicking, the closing, really all the making, but you've drafted in a little bit of a help for this latest pair, and really given me the privilege of having Jim actually work with you to make this next pair of shoes.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that, we often talk about the other shoemakers, and a lot of us are friends and we meet up, there's not so much competition. We all seem to get on. And you did say to me, well, I'd really like Jim to make you a pair of shoes. And as we know, he is the legend of Mayfair.
Yeah.
Well, or he's referred to as the legend of Mayfair. So we thought we better get the legend involved. And it's a really nice thing to... it's a nice thing to have other shoemakers work with me.
I think we enjoyed
making good things. We enjoy it. We go back a long way. We go back a long way. Our history of, maybe we'll get into how we met, but we've both been doing it for nearly 40 years now.
It's amazing.
So it's a long time.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic because amongst the shoemaking firms, they can be kind of quite competitive and not totally supportive of one another. But underneath the shoemaking firms, you have shoemakers, right? Which are you gentlemen, that actually are doing the outwork and making the shoes. I mean, last making might traditionally be done kind of within the shoemaking firm, but then the actual making of the shoe itself is generally and traditionally sent out, right?
Mostly. And
so, amongst the shoemakers, as I've seen, you guys are actually quite, there's a nice camaraderie amongst them, and it's really friendly. I mean, that's one of the things I've certainly been struck by.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all get on. We all know each other. We know Daniel, we know Nicholas Templeman, we know Dan Vegan and Tony Gaziano. So we've all grown up knowing each other, really. And so underneath those kind of the firms or the brands, if you like, you've got all of the shoemakers who, we all go out for drinks just around in the pub just around the corner. On those shoemaker drinks. And both Jim and I go to the shoemakers conference a lot of the time. And Jim's taught as well at the shoemakers conference, and he does a lot of teaching. Of shoemaking as well. So that's the way it is, really.
Well, it is an oral tradition, right? And that even a shoemaker with the largest library of shoemaking books is inadequate to really learn shoemaking, right? I mean, you must be taught from someone. Is that right?
I think it's very difficult to learn from books. I mean, they're a great tool, a reference, but there's nothing like actually seeing somebody do it and explaining the technique. It's the way to learn, really.
Yeah.
The guys that taught us would never have read a shoemaking book in their lives.
Yeah. I mean, there were shoemaking books, but you've got to remember, when Jim and I trained, it wasn't really a popular thing to do. It wasn't really like nowadays, where a lot of people and a lot of young people want to become shoemakers. No. Nobody really wanted to do it 40 years ago. It's just very different,
Well, talk a little bit, Jim. I mean, we've heard Dominic's story. I'd love to hear yours about, how did you get into shoemaking and where did you train?
Well, it's a long time ago now. I originally, when I was still at school, I had a little part-time job shoe repairing. And the guy that ran the shop had been a maker in his early days. So he got me interested in it. And I went from school to work at an orthopaedic shoemaker in the East End of London. And I was really into it. I loved doing it.
Okay.
But I met some of the guys there and they told me about the West End, which I didn't have a clue about. And I got told about lob, and I thought that sounds interesting. So I sought out Lob, managed to get an interview there with John Hunter Lobb, who's still the director.
Yeah. Now this is the father of the current boys that run at the Brothers.
Yeah. And I got accepted. Started off working in the shop doing last alterations, which I really didn't enjoy. Because I felt I was on, you were dealing with the customers and I was just a 18-year-old lad and I was a bit overwhelmed with it all, Eventually got a space. They had a little workroom. I think you've been in there, where Nicolaus
in the
worked.
basement, yeah. We filmed with Nicolaus.
Yeah.
Briefly.
There were, at one time, I think there were 6 of us in there. Can you imagine? Yeah.
Well, I've seen the names etched into the wall.
Tattooed on the wall.
So I was lucky enough to work with an old Polish shoemaker, a fella called Zenon Herenkiewicz, known as Morris to us.
Okay.
Because we couldn't pronounce his name. Really, all these old Polish guys that worked there, they were so talented. I think you were taught by a Polish guy.
Yeah,
these guys all came over after the war.
Yes, they did.
Right,
Yeah. Had a fantastic work ethic, marvellous craftsman. Had really seen a hard time. And I think they were just grateful to be in a sort of civilised place and to have work,
Yeah.
And we were lucky to be taught by these old guys. My teacher, Morris, had worked at Tuxtec, so he had that lineage as well.
And touch on that a little bit, because this is a name that has come up often in conversation with older shoemakers that I'm largely unfamiliar with. So if I might divert you a bit, can you share a little bit about what that firm is and why it's so often referenced?
Unfortunately, by the time I was shoemaking, they were no longer there.
Okay.
They were absorbed by Lob.
Okay.
The remains of the business was taken by Lob. And a lot of the workmen sort of dispersed around the West End. But I think for us, the kind of the holy grail of shoemaking would have been people like Anthony Cleverley, who was the nephew of George Cleverley. Quite a secretive guy. I don't know if you ever got to meet him, did you?
No, he was
what a wonderful shoemaker, though.
Yeah,
really.
He was well known for just his aesthetic.
Yes, yeah. And of course, Tuxtec as well were just made lovely, lovely shoes.
Okay.
And they had this kind of signature chisel toe, which was kind of taken over by Cleverley's.
Cleverley's, exactly. That's where that chisel toe ended up.
Yeah. And not every shoe they made was this sleek, beautiful looking thing, but they just had a reputation of being fantastic men's dress shoemakers.
Okay.
Whereas some of the other companies had different. Maxwell, when it was in its pomp, was well known for riding boots.
Okay.
And then you had various other makers like Joseph Box, ladies' work. So it's a bit like the tailoring. You could go to a specific shop for a specific kind of work. They would tackle all kinds of things, but they had a speciality.
Yeah, each house kind of had their own focus.
And the makers also specialised, whereas now we're jack of all trades and probably master of none.
Would beg to differ on that point. Judging by the shoes, but
you would have guys that would just make riding boots all the time. You'd have guys that did pumps and turns all the time. That's why they were so good at it, because they just did it all the time. And they would work for all of the shops.
Yeah.
And it became, you know, there were specialisms. But that's kind of gone now, isn't it?
I think that's one of the big changes.
Shrunk, you know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big changes. Much more of us are almost multi-purpose now. You know, that we'd actually, you know, throughout my lifetime, I've worked doing ladies' shoes, and Jim does ladies' work as well.
Yeah.
We've made riding boots. We've made men's shoes, and that is a big change, really.
Yeah.
And that it's essentially narrowed, right? The scope.
Yeah.
Right, so
The trade is smaller.
Yeah.
And it's different because you've got the rise of more independents now, you know, one-man bands. Whereas for us, our work in life was working for the big 5 or 6
firms,
makers, you know.
Yeah.
I think
Back in the shed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Back in the,
yeah.
I think what has really changed is that when Jim and I started training, we always assumed that we would more or less stay. We never even thought about ourselves as having brands or being shoemakers. You know, we thought we were essentially just working tradesmen, working craftsmen.
Yeah.
And you know, my assumption was that I would more or less always work quietly away in the background in a firm for all of my working life, really.
Well,
and as the trade has changed, you know, people like us have had to come out of the closet,
the shadows.
so to speak, come out of the shadows and actually sort of front up a bit more than we ever used to have to. And we never really expected to do that.
No.
We just thought we'd be craftsmen working away, really.
Well, it is interesting what the internet in a lot of ways has allowed, because, there's no question that the shoemaking trade has shrunk, right? But I feel like we're in the midst of this renaissance that has really been catalyzed and allowed by virtue of the fact that now Instagram and YouTube has extended, people's ability to see the incredible work that you do. And I know, Jim, you've got an Instagram page that I follow very closely and really enjoy, because it allows me to actually, see the making that would have never have ever been seen by even customers of all these firms you speak. Because it was always done off premises,
you just
as
see
outwork.
the final product.
And maybe at Lob you'd go in and see some last making, but amongst all the firms, I mean, Lob was the only firm that had last making on the ground floor, right? Otherwise, it was done upstairs or in the basement, and a customer would have never even had visibility into that aspect of the craft.
But I think that's interesting, and that's what. Well, firstly, we've got to be thankful for people like you, Kirby, because you've actually brought. Well, I think interestingly enough, what you have done is you've brought the breadth of different shoes and different shoemaking and different shoemaking styles through your YouTube channel, really. And we would never be, without you coming down on that freezing day to Last Maker House to do last making.
That first video that started
that
it all.
first video. I can remember when this chap rang me up. It was Kirby Allison on the phone. I want to do a film on last making. And I thought, who the bloody hell's Kirby Allison? I've never heard of him.
That's right.
And we met at Victoria Station. But without you and what you do with that channel, the likes of me and Jim we'd still be working away in our sheds probably.
And I don't have a website. I've just got my Instagram page, which is a little window into my working life.
It's a little periscope into your shed.
But I think Jim,
no, carry on.
what is also important is that, what Jim said was really important, is that when, you look at his website and there's a lot of shoemaking technical stuff going on there. And when we learn, we knew shoemakers who wouldn't show us things.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Tell Kirby about that, because
let's go
they
back
worked
then.
a lot in secret when we were trying to train, and they didn't want to show because it was their income.
Yeah, so I guess this camaraderie we speak of, really might be in fact a modern kind of phenomenon. So you're back at Lob's.
Yes.
You're in this small little tiny box that exists in the center of the basement.
Yeah.
And you're there with a bunch of these Polish shoemakers.
Well, it was one guy, Morris, was our teacher, and the rest were apprentices.
Okay.
And there was a well-known maker called Cookie.
Yep.
Cookie was there when I first was there. Cookie was this throwback kind of hippie guy, covered in tattoos, long hair, beard.
Yeah, hat.
This is a while ago, so this is
so
quite...
laid back.
Yeah.
And he was a working maker there. He'd been taught by Morris as well. And, you know, I was the young kid on the block, and they were really, really nice guys, very generous guys, you know, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wish I could have stayed longer, but I got to about 21, and Eric Lobb, who was the managing director then, he said, right, you're ready to go, you're going to be an outworker. And I'm looking at him thinking, I'm not ready. So I had my shed back at home, and I just thought, how am I going to earn a living doing this?
Yeah.
And, you know, I really, really struggled for quite a few years. If it hadn't been that I lived at my parents' house, I could never have done it, you know.
Yeah. It struggled in so much as you just didn't have enough work to...
No, there was enough
work.
work.
Or it just took you
but
so long to finish a pair that you couldn't support yourself.
Yeah, it was very difficult, because to do quality work, you've got to spend time.
Yeah.
People say, oh, what's the secret of this? Nice finishing. There's not really a secret. It's detail and time.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I think that, I mean, you talk about lob training. I mean, I think it's a very important and certainly not to be overlooked, you know, really characteristic of lob is that they have done so much to train shoemakers.
Yes.
You know, not over the years, not over the decades, but really over the last century.
Yeah.
And so when you look at lob, and they are probably the most expensive pair of shoes you can buy in England, right? I mean, maybe second only to some, you know, shoemakers in Paris. You know, they play an important role and really, I mean, in some ways, a standard bearer of the industry.
Yeah, they're very traditional, and they don't get a lot of love sometimes for that, which is wrong, because, you know, it's their style, their tradition. But the West End, as regards shoemaking, wouldn't be the same without Lobb at all.
Yeah.
And they should be credited for that, because they've trained so many people and have been generous enough to let them go their own way. Because they're big enough that you know, they feel secure in themselves. Yeah. And, you know, like their style or not, they really have kept the West End going.
I think whenever you buy a pair of Lobs, I mean, you are buying more than just the shoe. You're buying really the prestige of owning a pair of Lobs. That kind of extends by proxy into the firm's history. Right? It's customer book that you are
You're buying
part
into
of.
the heritage.
You know,
You're buying into the heritage of the West End.
And then, you know, really also, you know, by virtue or by, you know, their work, supporting in a lot of ways its continuation.
There's no question about that. They were always the firm that were doing the trainees when we started as young people. You know,
nobody else would
really do it. And the irony was all the other firms basically pinched the Lobs makers. Exactly. So Lobs used to pay for the training, and then people used to go.
And that's what I mean about how generous they are, really.
Exactly.
And they never get credit for it.
And without them, many of us wouldn't have started. You know, I remember Morris from the Lobs days. I was interviewed by Eric Lobb in 1983. And, you know, in the Polish corridor, as it was referred to, they used to call it, we're heading off downstairs to the Polish corridor. You know, there was Morris down there. There was Ian Wood and Johnny Carter there in 1983. And you must have gone by 83, hadn't you? Gone by then, And Cookie wasn't there either. Cookie had gone down to the tree makers. He was at Elephant and Castle at Peen's, So, yes, without Lobb, you know, that a lot of our history of our generation goes back to Lobbs and that firm. And without them, there wouldn't be virtually nothing left. There'd be no real trade.
I feel like every shoemaker can be traced, you know, within 1 degree of separation, kind of back to Lobb. You know, either you were trained at Lobb or trained by someone that trained at Lobb.
Exactly.
For sure,
you know, you don't have to go any deeper than that to get back to Lobb.
Literally, it is one generation back, more or less, isn't it?
And although I was always told by Morris, when you're self-employed, he said you've got to have 2 shops. He said, you can't just. They'll want you to work for one shop. But you mustn't. You need your main shop and what you used to call a by-stroke. So a second shop so that if work got a bit tight, you know, you could get work elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I went to Foster's as my second shop, but they actually became my first shop.
Really? Okay.
After a while, yeah. But in all the time I've been making, which is like 45 years now, I think.
Crazy.
I've always worked for Lob.
Mm-hmm.
I never stopped working for Lob. I mean, I kind of semi-retired a few years back from Lob, but they still ring me and give me the occasional job. And I've got some customers that I've made so many shoes for them, they don't really want to change the maker.
Mm-hmm.
I've got one customer there that I've made 97 pairs for.
No kidding.
We've got to get to 100.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Keep going, Jim. Keep going. Yeah.
But that is an interesting characteristic of Lob, is that, you know, one of the things that they not guarantee, but they really seek to, maintain is the fact that, you know, once you start having shoes made by a maker, that all of your future shoes.
I mean, that's
it's not a guarantee, right? But it's one of the things that they certainly try to do.
It's pretty much, and most of the shops will do that.
Yeah.
Same at Foster's.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Once you've made and everything's right, then, you know, because every maker's different, they last differently.
Yeah.
They, you know, do things differently, so they pretty much will do that. In an emergency, they would change the maker, but.
So what was it like? I mean, Terry Moore at Foster's is another one of these kind of legendary 20th century.
Yeah.
And so Terry Moore was Foster and Son's last maker.
Yes.
Which is really the head of the bespoke department.
Yeah.
In many ways. I mean, at Foster's it certainly would have been. And he's someone that, along with kind of John Carnera and Anthony Cleverly, you hear as being one of the great kind of iconic last makers of the late 20th century. Is that right?
Yeah. Now, Terry originally came from Peel's, which was a very prestigious company, wasn't it?
Yeah,
really.
Exactly.
And he talked very fondly of that, of working there. And then he came to Foster's, and then I met him when I went along, and we just clicked. We got on really well. He was so encouraging. I mean, Lob's taught me how to make shoes, but I would say Terry kind of knocked the edges off me, you know, and gave me a more of an insight into different shapes and things, you know. And you know, the maker has to work with the last maker for it to work right. You know, the last maker's got to understand what a shoemaker needs to make the shoe look correct. Yeah. And I've got to understand what the last maker's done on the last, you know, for it to work.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly.
And so the more you work together, the better the product becomes, because you understand. And Terry would make a last, and he'd know that by giving it to me, I would do certain things, and he'd know what the shoe would end up like. So it's teamwork, really. Although, you know, Dominic's a fairly rare beast that he can do everything.
Yeah, rare bird, Dominic.
You're rare bird. That's me.
I mean, but I can as well, but not as well as him. Not as well as him. My closing is not as good as Dominic's, and my last making knowledge is not as thorough. But teamwork is the whole thing,
really,
isn't it?
And again, when because I first heard about Jim through Terry at Foster's when I was making the riding boots for Terry at Foster's.
Okay.
So I used to go in. That's where. I mean, I hadn't really heard of. So this would have been in the 90s, you know, and I'd heard Jim's name mentioned before, but it's when I used to go in and see Terry, and I had much the same experience with Terry making the riding boots, because I had been making riding boots for Foster's, and then when I went to see Terry, I mean, he gave me a lot of advice on how to kind of, as Jim said, knock the edges off the riding boots. Yeah. You know, and he had a very specific way of thinking about the riding boots, because it's a completely different type of making. Completely different, really.
Yeah,
and as Jim said, we used to have... That is a different beast, and we used to just have makers who used to just make riding boots most of the time, really, until, again, that market shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And I guess, you know, in the 50s, there must have been 5 or 6 riding boot firms in
Yes.
London that were
Entire
just
firms.
making riding boots.
And bespoke riding boots.
Bespoke
Yeah.
riding boots,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
again, that's another thing that has really completely disappeared.
Yeah.
But I heard about Jim first at Foster's in the 90s when I was doing the riding boots for Terry. And
And
that's
how did,
our
talk to
paths
me a little bit
crossed.
about kind of your, kind of friendship together. I mean, so you guys met and it's just, through
Well, we
the
didn't
trade.
meet
you just-
until quite late, did we?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I
right.
heard about Jim for 30 years or so,
same
or
here,
35
yeah.
years, and we met. I think we met in the pub.
Yes.
Fine, we
Yeah,
did. And
we did.
I looked over. I said to somebody else, "Is that Jim McCormack over there?" I had no idea what he looked like.
Yeah.
I said, "Is that Jim over there?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah." So we just met.
And we got on,
literally.
didn't we? Yeah,
Yeah, we just
yeah.
met at the back door down the
Yeah,
road there.
Right down the road.
I think because through our working lives we'd suffered the same pain,
Yeah, we suffered.
and we kind of,
It's nice to have someone to commiserate with.
Well,
we understood each other. So
It's
yeah,
a hard, it's tough being,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
easy to be a good shoemaker. It's
Yeah.
just not easy.
Yeah.
It's a lot of concentration, a lot of hours.
You can't rush it.
It's
Yeah.
physically
Yeah.
quite hard
Physically
work.
demanding,
Yeah.
busting your hands
It's
up.
interesting saying about doing teaching. In recent years, I've done a fair bit of teaching, and I've got some ongoing at the moment. And when you get people come along, you don't realise until you see them try to do things, the amount of hand strength and things that you need. You know,
strength in
they've
your
got the
arms.
tools, and they know what to do, but they just haven't got the physical strength to do it. And
Yeah.
it's like
Whereas for you,
training your body.
Yeah.
Well, we've done it for years.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
lost a little bit of perspective of, in fact,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
strenuous of work it is, and then you
Yeah.
see someone come along and fumble,
Yeah,
and you're like,
yeah.
oh, wow, that does.
And it's actually good for your shoemaking to do a bit of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
One, you're giving back,
Yeah,
and also it gives you a perspective of how to explain things.
Mm.
And we can't go on forever.
No.
And the new generation have got to pick up
Yeah.
the mantle, and carry on.
Yeah. Well,
and hopefully keep this West End tradition that we talk about. I mean, the world of shoemaking has changed and it's gone in very many directions.
Mm-hmm.
But we want the West End
Yeah, the style, the
style
English
and
West
kind
End
of
style,
thing
yeah.
to remain as a choice.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So we've got this beautiful pair of shoes and these gorgeous black suede shoe bags
Yeah.
sitting on the table. And so this is, and I'm wearing a pair of Dominic Casey shoes. This is the first pair you made,
Yeah.
right? Which is a beautiful black cap toe Oxford. Mm-hmm. And it's got the truly bespoke toe
Yeah.
shape
Yeah.
that Dominic
yeah.
created for me. The Kirby Clubland
Yeah.
Negroni, which is kind of a soft, updated round.
Round,
right?
yeah,
I mean, it's a
exactly.
smart-
Yeah,
how do you
more
describe it?
elongated, slightly more elegant. Well, it's really straighter on the sides and it's symmetrical on the rounds, so it's not really like an oval.
It was kind of new to me.
It was new to Jim, yeah.
When you sent me the last, I said, really?
Yeah, I know. He did, yeah. He did say that to me. So what toe shape am I making on this last? Because as you look at the trees, when they come out, they look nothing like the toe of the
Right,
last,
yeah,
do they?
yeah.
Well, but that's really what Jim was saying, is that, you need to work with a last maker to
Yeah.
talk about, well, actually, what shape do you want me to
Yeah.
make these into?
Yeah.
It's not just a question of actually blindly following the thing.
No. No.
So it was, yeah.
Well, we're going to have so much of
interesting,
this to get into. And
Yeah.
so one of the things, whenever we were talking about this, Dominic, you were like, well, I'm really kind of getting so busy. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get any shoes out for you, Kirby, for the next, 12 or 24
Yeah.
months. And I was throwing things across
Yeah.
the room and, but he said, well, maybe, this would be an opportunity to have Jim make something because, it can be a little touchy with shoemakers and last makers as to whether or not, they give their work to. But luckily, he
Sure,
and you
yeah.
have such a good relationship, and Dominic is so generous. He offered to say, well, I'd be happy to have Jim make for me. And so I jumped
Yeah,
at that
yeah.
opportunity, of course, knowing full well who you are. And so we spoke about this a little bit. What type of style do you want? And I said, I think it was at your
Yeah.
suggestion.
Well, you'd had I'd done the dark brown pigskin shoes for you, and you just said that you really like the pigskin leather anyway,
Yeah.
don't you? You've had lots of cleverly pigskin stuff, and I said, well, why don't we just do a black pigskin, which will
Yeah.
give you a multitude of uses, and so that's how we ended up with that, really.
And then we decided
Okay.
on also having Jim make
Yeah.
to do something in the traditional West End style.
Yeah, I think I didn't really give too much instruction to Jim in terms of the making. I just said make him, make him a classic English West End style pair of shoes, really. Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at the shoes.
That's what we've ended up with.
Well, and I think it would be fun, hopefully we can do this, is to take a look at these shoes and kind of talk through some of these elements that you think exemplify West End making. And let's talk a little bit about what that means. Like, what is West End making and what would not be West End making?
Yeah.
And we've got it.
Well, let's look at some example. Shoes, and then we may as well.
We can't leave them on the table forever.
I know they're lurking here. They're lurking here. So.
Wow! Look at this. I mean, that's pretty spectacular.
Well.
Look at these laces.
All his own work.
These laces look familiar.
Oh yeah, there'll be a Berluti knot in there before we know what's happened.
So the beautiful, black pigskin, which I'm kind of partial to the pigskin, only in so much as that I just think it gives beautiful visual texture to the shoe, and you don't find it ready to wear really ever.
I mean, pigskin used to be very, very popular.
Very popular. Very popular.
And it fell out of favour. I don't know why. It could be getting hold of good pigskin. I think
it was good pigskin is
very
hard
to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really hard to find.
Yeah.
So, so it's just,
But it has got a nice texture, isn't it?
Lovely texture.
Well,
super shoes.
Yeah, and I can't wait to polish these up,
Yeah.
And really make them shine because, again, the leather benefits.
I've been trying to polish him for ages.
I can see.
He'll be polishing away.
He'll be there doing this,
So talk a little bit about, they're beautifully polished, So talk a little bit about these shoes, if you will, and I mean, what is West End making? And is this a good example of that?
Well, I would say it's West End making's pretty understated, really, isn't it?
It's
if you walk into a room and your shoes are kind of, lit up and
patina,
kind of showing, shining everything. That isn't really what you're after.
If your shoes literally walk into the room
before you do,
before you do, then it's not West End.
It's not West End.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with all these other different styles of making.
For sure.
That's what we need.
That's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And certain things will suit certain people, and certain things will appeal to certain people. So, West End making is really for the gent, isn't it? Every guy would have his collection of shoes to wear at certain events. You would have, generally the heels are fairly square. You might have a slight bit of pitch in them, but not
square in terms of
not pitched in to make the top piece quite small. Generally fairly square. The waist wouldn't be exceptionally narrow, which is very popular at the moment, isn't it? This really
the narrow beveled waist is really kind of a modern. It's not so much modern because it's existed forever.
Fiddleback waist. We never made a fiddleback waist until we never even saw a fiddleback waist.
It was Gaziano and Girling kind of got that,
resurrected that.
Yeah, I mean it was around. You would see it if you look at the exhibition work at Lob.
Yeah.
You would see a fiddleback there, but it really caught on, didn't it?
Yeah.
Much to some makers' disgust because it's more work, but you do what the client wants. So that became popular. But a normal curved, beveled waist is what we would normally do.
Yeah, like this. I mean, there is certainly shape to this.
Yes. Yeah.
It's distinctly bespoke. I mean, it's not like a factory made, ready to wear shoe that literally has a flat waist.
Yes.
Right. I mean, this has shape. To it right here, and it's also not. There's no ink. I mean, is the inking because you'll see some shoes. They have an ink pattern where this is black. I mean, is that would that fall within the scope of West End making, or would that kind of push you outside the?
No, well, it would, but each shop has its own distinctive look and style. So, funny, I was talking about this last night and trying to explain what an outworker's job is. And I came up with the idea, it's like being a session musician in the music business. You need to be able to read what the shop likes and make to their style. So I would make a lob shoe in a certain way. I would make a Foster's shoe in a certain way, and whoever else I would work for, they would have different looks, and you would have to reproduce that. You know. So generally, somewhere like Lob in the West End, they would do a clean, what they call a natural finish, or they do a black finish.
A solid black.
Yeah. Other companies, I think, cleverly do the fishtail quite a lot, do they?
Yeah, fishtail quite a lot.
Yeah.
I mean,
G&G do all their stuff with the fishtail and a stain, whereas this is just done with polish, cream or polish.
Yeah, and it's polished up to a nice
kind
of color and shine.
Yeah, it gets scraped and sanded, and then you put on cream or polish and buff it up.
I think what I like about this, and Jim is far too modest to say anything like this, that there's nowhere to hide when you produce this type of sole bottom finish. You know, your making has to be perfect, really. You know, making has to be absolutely 100% on point, because you can't disguise anything with nails.
The only
can't
things you'll
disguise with
see
any
are the natural
inks or anything like that. You just get the natural, you know, literally the scars of the in the leather, basically.
Well, and look at how
that's
beautifully channeled this is.
Yeah,
right. I mean, you can't even tell.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's really quite miraculous. And the channel stitching bee is where the outsole is sewn onto the welt, and this is cut into folded back.
Yeah.
You sew through it, and then you.
Yeah. So from here round to here, this section, you cut the channel much wider.
Okay.
And you sew it. You use a different awl. So it's a sewing awl, and it's very curved. And you sew that, and then when you get to here, the channel is not as wide, and you use a stitching awl, which is a different shaped awl, and you're stitching rather than sewing. Yeah. And that's how come you can get the small stitches. I mean, this isn't exceptionally small. I think it was 12.
12. Kirby wanted 12. Yeah.
I think originally you asked for.
Well, these are 16.
Right. Yeah.
And I think as I was looking at other bespoke shoes, I think there is a certain visual register that you get with like a 12 SPI, that at 16 is too fine. Well, and just kind of blurs. I mean, you don't see the beautiful fudging, which is the indentations on top of the welt. That I think, again, is just one of those subtle visual details.
And that's a very West End thing. You know, you're saying about West End details. We had when I was trained at Lob, we had a strict rule of what number of stitches for what weight of sole.
Okay.
And they'd worked it out over the years that you got the optimum strength from doing it. So you would never really do a quarter edge any more than, say, 12.
Yeah.
And as the sole got finer, you get down to like a patent shoe for evening wear. You'd maybe do 16 or 18 to the inch, but it was a very thin sole.
Yeah.
A riding boot, which is heavier, you would do a heavier.
Yeah.
You might do 8 or 9.
10. Yeah. 8 to 10.
Yeah.
Like a double-soled shoe.
Yeah. Whereas now, people just do whatever they want, and that's fine. You can do 16 to the inch if you want, but you're using a finer thread, and you're making a lot of holes in that welt. So it may not be as optimum for strength.
Well, I think that there's a certain misplaced pursuit of these kind of superfluous details where you kind of lose, I think, the essence or the integrity of the shoe.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun to kind of chase those around, but I think I've certainly kind of come full circle in seeing, enough work to say, you know what, this is done this way, and it's been done like this for so long, because there's just something visually balanced about it.
Exactly.
And not just visually, but also the integrity is much more sound. And it's done this way for a reason. Like, I mean, it's evolved to this point intentionally.
Yes.
And it's
that's a good word, balance.
Yeah.
I think a West End shoe
is always
has
balanced, isn't it?
You don't over exaggerate anything.
And it's not flashy. I mean,
exactly.
You walk into one of the traditional St. James's clubs, with the West End shoe, and no one's going to be looking at your feet.
Exactly.
But you're going to have a really
But
smart...
people will know.
Yeah, but people will know.
They'll just look down and they'll just know straight away.
All you've got to do is look and see that curved, beveled waist, and you know it's bespoke.
You know it's bespoke, what else? I mean, what other... So this is West End, right? So talk a little bit about what's not West End, and let's, maybe reference a few other makers.
Well, it's difficult. I think the first thing is that a lot of us, and the length of that last it's about, Jim and I would always think of in terms of proportion and balance. Mm-hmm. So when I'm trying to make the shoe, what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about the length of this vamp point here in relationship to the length of the facing part of the shoe here. Yeah. And so I'm always thinking about balancing the length of the last with the width of your foot, with the proportion of the vamp and the proportion of the facing. Mm-hmm. So there's a sweet spot where you can hit and it just looks right. Yeah. And what we see with a lot of modern design, and it is what it is, what they're doing is they're playing with the proportion. Yeah. The toes of a lot of young last makers and a lot of young styles now, you'll see them, they'll add maybe 5 sizes onto the length of the foot for making the last. So you'll get an elongated toe front, which then changes all of the proportion and the balance of everything, really. And what a lot of the younger designers and shoemakers are doing is basically what they're doing is they're moving up and down the last and changing the proportion and the balance. But Jim and I would say that there is a sweet spot. Just as you said, you go full circle and you come back to a point where you said, actually, there's a reason why 12 stitches to the inch is 12 stitches to the inch on a quarter sole, because it looks balanced and it looks in proportion and it's got some structural integrity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the way we think about West End shoemaking, really, to actually get proportion, balance and the sole structural integrity correct, really. Yeah. And that's really is what it's about for us. Yeah.
One of the things that, again, I love so much about a bespoke pair of shoes is how much depth there is behind the surface, right? There's so much to the making of the shoe that you wouldn't even know you wouldn't even observe it, because you wouldn't even know to see it. Right, so I thought it might be interesting. I mean, we've got you, Jim. As a maker, you talk about the collaboration between, the maker and the last maker, right, in terms of kind of doing each other's work or kind of collaborating to make each other's work better. I mean, could you look at this shoe and talk a little bit about, from your perspective as a shoemaker, maybe some things that you see that you think Dominic has done well and exemplify fine last making, that whenever with your eyes you look at it and you say, that's done well, that's done nicely, and it might be something that I wouldn't even know to pick up on.
Well, it's
going to try to make you blush.
When I get a last along, no matter who I work for, before I do anything, I have a look at it, and I'll look at it from various angles, and I'll just look and just see, because there's technical things that Dominic has to do for me to be able to get everything nice and level, to get a nice waist. So, as he can work his magic with the shapes and your measurements, but he has to incorporate these things. And so that's what I do. I look and I see that the seat is nice and level, and I'll look at the balance of it. I'll look to see where the proportion, so where I can put the waist, because it's up to me where I start the heel and finish this waist. Same here.
So that's not something given to you by the last maker.
No, it's up to me. So you can put it further forward, you can put it further back, and like Dominic says, there is a bit of a sweet spot, and I think a lot of it's done by eye, isn't it?
Just in.
You can't really tell why you like the look of it, but it just looks right. If you make this too long or too short, it just looks out of proportion.
Yeah, and I'd say that what Jim does classically is he understands the proportion of actually where to put the waist in relation to the length of the sole, in relation to the length of the heels, and these are things that you would see all of the time with different makers. A lot of people make very long waists and very narrow waists, and when you look at the bottom of the shoe, proportionately it just looks different, doesn't it?
Yes,
so
it
this
does,
would be what I would describe as sort of classic English style making in terms of the proportion and the structure that's going along on the bottom here.
Well,
and for us, that's really important.
The shape is also, I mean, this outsole is not stamped out of a piece of leather. I mean, you have flat outsole leather, and you cut and shape this by hand.
Yes.
And so this particular shape, again, I would imagine, is, again, at your discretion. I mean, if you were to have 3 shoemakers make a pair of shoes in the same last, they wouldn't all have the exact same outsole shape, would they?
No, they wouldn't, no. And the way you treat the leather as well, because we have given a batch of leather, the hard leather for the outside, and the way you treat that. If I'm not very careful with the leather, this is Baker's oak bark leather, fantastic leather, but you've got to know how to treat it.
Yeah.
If you soak it too long, or you don't soak it long enough, or you don't dry it out properly, you'll get marks on it, stains on it, and you won't be able to do a clean finish. Well, it just won't look any good. It won't look
any good, will it, on the bottom?
So you've got to know your leather, you've got to know how to treat it, and you have to know when you're making the sole, you have to thin this part down and shape it in a different way from the forepart and the seat. But these are all things that you learn, and different shops like different looks, you know, so you adapt.
I mean, one of the other things, again, we're just talking about the outsole, we haven't even, you know, moved on to anything else, but one of the other things that, again, whenever I learned, it just kind of blew me away about the work that goes into the outsole is, for one, you guys are using oak bark tanned leather outsoles, which are the best, right? I mean, it's tanned in a pit of natural bark.
Have you been there?
You know, I've never been to Baker's, but I've been to J.R. Mindenbach's, and I've seen the process.
If you get the chance to go to Baker's, go.
We're hoping to this summer.
We'll try that.
And it's tanned for 6 to 9 months. And it produces a 100% natural. It's certainly far superior to any fast tanned leather outsole. But the work doesn't stop there, as if my understanding is the shoemaker then soaks the outsole and then will pound it with a hammer to further compress the pore structure, or the fiber structure, to just create an even longer lasting outsole. Is that right, or did I totally hear that from someone that was lying to me?
Certainly, certain parts, if you hammer the leather, it stiffens it up, and you don't always want that. Now, on a turn shoe or a pump, you don't want that. You want the flexibility. But like heel lifts, you want them to be very tight fibre. So you would hammer heel lifts, and every piece of leather is different. So I get my leather from Dominic if I'm doing a job for him, and I'll look at the leather, and I'll bend it, and I'll just see which end is more flexible than the other, and I'll put it the way it's going to work in the shoe. Once you've soaked it, it changes the characteristics again.
Completely,
And I'll look and I'll just feel, you know, which way I'm going to use it, because it's two pieces of leather are the same, are they?
No. So you have to understand how to, you know, and you've got different types of leather from the different bits going inside. You know, you're using the bellies, you're using the shoulders, you're using the butt of the leather. So there's a whole, just understanding the leather that goes on the internals of a shoe is a real important part of being a shoemaker as well, really.
What else? I mean, as a maker, whenever you receive the last, you know, you're looking at the balance, the shape, that certain things are done a particular way. To allow you to then create, you know, such a perfect shoe. Is there anything else?
Well, normally as an outworker, you're kind of given instructions which have come straight from the last maker and the client as to what they want it to look like, and it's almost like a code, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's shorthand. It's
shorthand.
I mean, it's a small tag, right? That's wrapped with the leather. And you receive it's a bundle, you'd say.
And you read this work ticket, and I still get makers that haven't been around as long as me ringing me up saying, "What does this mean?" And it's a bit of shorthand as to how much welt is going to show. You know, is there going to? It tells you whether they want toe plates or what kind of heel, what kind of waist treatment. Just any details.
How many nails on the heel? What type of? top lift.
Yeah,
I mean,
top pieces.
And
yeah.
generally, less is more in the nailing thing. I mean, I know it looks nice to have lots of brass nails, but often I think you do.
Well, I always
you do blind, don't you?
I was always taught that shoemakers, you don't see any nails in the top piece if you're a shoemaker. I was always told only repairers put nails in the top pieces, in a real pompous way.
I mean,
So
a blind top piece is just another technique. You know, that could be done, but this is what I normally do.
Yeah.
So that's what
that's
I did,
what we wanted. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And every shop will have its look.
Yeah.
Just like every tailor has its cut. I enjoyed that interview you did with the tailor. I'm trying to think of his name. Is it Redmayne?
Oh yes, Tom Mahon.
Yeah.
Redmayne.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good memory.
So much of what he said about the tailoring game is the same in shoemaking.
In what regard?
Well, just the thing of the hierarchy in the shop.
Yeah.
That was so interesting. When Eric Lobb would come down to examine the shoes every day at Lobb, we were on our best behaviour because he was like the headmaster. He was a lovely bloke. He very charismatic bloke, Eric Lobb. But quite.
Everyone standing at attention there.
Yeah, we were all
turn the radio down.
Yeah,
exactly.
Down.
Yeah.
Well, watch your language.
And they used to call him Mr. Eric.
Yeah.
Mr. Eric. Yeah. So
that's interesting.
it was.
But it was very similar to our growing up. Was very similar to Tom Mahone when he was over at.
Yeah, so that was really interesting.
Anderson Shepherd, it was no different. At least we never got told off if we went out with our jackets on, as he did,
And the thing he said about the tailors not meeting up in the pub because they didn't want to have them discuss things, that was kind of true. The shop rivalry was definitely there when I was learning. But the makers, generally, we've always got on, haven't we? Because we're doing the same thing. And interesting what Dominic said about people being secretive in the early days. Lobb had an extra workshop in Soho.
That was down in where the
off Wardour Street.
Off Wardour Street,
And it's this old Dickensian house, and it had the glass maker and the tree maker in the basement. It would never be allowed now.
That's where Bill Bird was, wasn't it? Do you remember Bill Bird was making the trees down there? Yeah.
And upstairs was a room where makers could pay a very small rent and rent a space. So it'd be like a room like this, and there may be 6 makers in there, and they would work. They could work for whoever they wanted in the West End. And some of the guys, before my time, they would work. I'm looking at the curtains in that corner. They would work behind curtains.
Really?
Yeah, they would have when they're actually working. Nobody else could see them.
Incredible.
Because they didn't want any other makers to see how they did it.
Really?
And the only way you would get any tidbit of information about how to do things was to get them to the pub. And if they liked you and you bought them enough drinks, they may tell you a little thing. And that's true. Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Just a bit.
Yeah.
And how much difference would there be between, maker? I mean, you would think that, how many different ways is there to make a shoe?
Well, it's the finesse of it, I think, isn't it?
Exactly.
And you just suddenly see somebody do something in a certain way, and you think, that's how you get that look.
Any examples? For example, anything that you can think of that in your career someone told you and you're like,
Well, riding boots. I never really understood how to hand sew a riding boot until another Polish shoemaker, Jimmy Kowalczyk.
Jimmy, God bless him,
God bless him, was a fantastic closer. And one day he just showed me the awl that he used to stitch riding boots. And there was a scrap of leather in the workshop, and I'd asked him, and I thought, well, he'll never say it. But the next time he came into the shop, he just got out this little tiny awl, and he just showed me how to put it through the skin of the leather. So it's where you actually, riding boots got a lot of blind sewing on it. So it's just where you actually put the
part way through, don't you?
Part way through the substance of the leather in the middle. so it hides the stitches, and that's how you stitch the throat of a riding boot. And when I started making riding boots, there wasn't anyone really to show me. So I used to take old riding boots apart, and I'm sure Jim's done the same. We take stuff apart to try and work out how they were making it, you know, because there was nowhere where you could learn. Yeah. And, I'll never forget, that's exactly how I learned, from this old Polish guy just showing me, in 5 minutes how to, and all of a sudden it's like a light bulb moment. You suddenly realise that's how they do it, you know. That's, that's interesting.
And different makers would have their own recipes for things. And you wouldn't believe some of the stuff. There was one where to make a stain, a brown stain, to get a particular colour, I can't remember which maker it was, told me, and what he would do is he would get the skin of onions and put them into hot water, and it produces a brown colour.
Really?
Right? And he would add other bits and pieces to it, but the basis of it was this onion coloured water, and it would make this sort of translucent stain. I've tried making it.
Doesn't
work.
Do with that.
And they would make their own glue. We used to make a glue out of gelatin and acetic acid.
Right, gosh.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Dominic was sharing how I think Michelle kicked you out of the kitchen once for trying to be
exactly. I smelled some wax on the kitchen just recently. I sent Kirby a picture on his Instagram. I said,
I have to do that outside.
So I'm bubbling up some wax in a tin can.
Well, I'm surprised she let you do that.
Well, she didn't. She was out.
So each maker would have their own little recipes for things, and just a tiny little technique to do something can make such a difference. You wouldn't believe it. Even the way you make the thread.
Length of a kitchen.
Yeah, length of a kitchen. That's such a story.
Well, mine's similar. I've got my workshop is very small, really, but I know exactly where to stand to make the right length of thread depending on the size of the shoe.
Yeah, so this board or that board.
A really big one, I've got to stand right by the door, but a smaller one, I can, and a pump doesn't need such a big thread, so I can stand near the workbench. So
all those bad things.
It's all. You won't find it in books, will you?
No, you can't. That's the great beauty of this thing. It's an oral tradition, and you just learn by, paying to get some shoemaking lessons off Jim. In fact, I think I need to sign up for some of his shoemaking lessons.
I'm full at the moment.
That's right.
You're too busy.
Too busy.
Any stories that, as you look back on your 40 years in the trade?
Well, I got the great story about when I cut myself. So I'd just become an apprentice shoemaker, and Jim and I know that they had the Polish corridor, so I went to train with a Polish man called Robbie Cocken. And I don't know if you knew him, Jim. He was at Lobs. You never met Mr. Cocken. Anyway, so I'm sitting, and again, he was a fantastic Polish craftsman. And I'm sitting with him in his garden shed, and he had just shown me how to trim round an insole. First thing that I had to do is block some insoles, trim them round. And he trimmed round in one movement. He just went all the way round, turned the last, trimmed it in one. It was done. Perfect. And I thought, oh, well, I'll give that a go. I get my knife.
Sharp
knife, last in my hand, and I bring it up to the leather in the last. And the first cut, it slips, and I cut through this bit of my thumb, and there's this vein here, and blood shoots across his shed and onto the window of his shed. And I'm trying to stop, and I've been a shoemaker for 5 minutes, and I'm trying to stop all this blood. It was going on the last, it's going on the, and he said, and he didn't miss a beat. He was stitching some soles on, didn't miss a beat, and he said, I won't do the Polish accent, but he said, I don't mind you cutting yourself, just don't get blood on the shoes. And it was just pumping out of my arm, and it was all up on the window. That was
Morris,
the end.
Morris said that to us. He said, you can cut yourself as many times as you like. If you cut the shoe, that's when I'm going to have a problem.
Yeah. Sounds like a scene out of a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah, exactly. We were just, when we started, we were just like a lot of the young people that come to us to do training now, you know. And you think, well, they just don't have the skill in their hands. They don't know how to hand a knife. And you know what? I've nearly cut the thumb off within 5 minutes of starting.
My first day at Lob, I was working up in the shop. I had John Hunter Lobb in the bench behind me, and I'm just trying to, you know, make myself look useful, and I'm playing about with some leather and whatever, and I had an awl. I put the awl right through my hands, and I thought, oh God, you know, I thought I can't let anyone see what I've done because they'll think I'm a complete idiot. So I pulled it out, and it was really hurting, and I was just trying to pretend it hadn't happened. That was on my first day there.
I know. So we both had our first day experiences, both involving blood.
That's how you become a shoemaker.
And minor injury. And I think until you've actually had that
shoemaker.
as a shoemaker, you haven't even started.
Yeah.
I'm crying now. Let me.
But they both. I never forgot that. I'd never seen blood come flying out. Still got the scar as well, but I'd never seen it actually, shooting across it. And it went onto the window of his shed, and he didn't miss a bloody beat. He just carried on stitching. I got some amazing stories about him.
My old workshop, and it was really hot in the summer. This was a few years back, and I had sandals on, no socks, because it was so warm, you know. And I dropped my knife, and the knife went into my foot and just missed a big vein in my foot. But there was a lot of blood, and I thought, God, you know, I'm going to bleed to death in my workshop. So straight away, I put my foot up onto the bench to stop the blood flow.
I'm surprised you've got that flexibility. I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would have died.
God, I thought, you know, I'll bleed to death by the time I drive to hospital, you know.
Well, those knives, I mean...
they're sharp. They're sharp. Yeah, wonderful. We got great knife stories,
Yeah.
when they slip.
I mean, it's really incredible to think of just the amount of shoemaking history right here. Not to paint you guys as being, you know, old, but wise, you know. But, I mean, you guys have really seen so much and... you know, represent, you know, kind of so much of the actual trade itself that it's really, I mean, I'm just enjoying this so much. I'm in awe of these stories.
Well, I think we're both, Jim and I would say we've been really lucky in our working lives. You know, we've literally spent 40 years making shoes. You know, we've had a great time doing it. It's been tough. You know, it's not been particularly easy, and it still isn't. It's still not particularly easy.
Certainly gets harder as you get older.
It gets harder as you get older.
Well, and COVID has really challenged a lot of things with the shoemakers not being able to travel. I mean, Foster's is effectively, you know, their bespoke department's defunct.
Declined,
and you know, a lot of the shoemakers haven't been able to travel around to do their trunk shows. And I know that, you know, the trade, because it is independent, you've got all these independent outworkers, really do rely on that volume. So hopefully, you know, as people are able to travel again and come visit London, everyone will take that money they saved during lockdown and go commission their first pair of bespoke shoes, because they really are something special.
And I think the other thing, Kirby, is in this world now where we're trying to be protective of things that are made, you know, and what being wasteful and things like that. If you think about a bespoke shoe, it's all natural products, and if you look after it, it will last you a long time. So what they say is buy less but buy better, and if we can all do that, and you know, if people don't use us, you know, we'll die out. You know?
Indeed.
And I think there's more of an appreciation, isn't there? That
I think that's what's changed.
These trades are worth supporting. You know?
They are, absolutely. And especially, you know, these British trades. I mean, I see them as so much of a part of the fabric of this country culturally, right? Because, you know, shoemaking, you know, bespoke tailoring, shirt making, I mean, even the other kind of random trades that you see in and around Jermyn Street and the Piccadilly Arcade. I mean, even these random shops, these independent shops that, whose business is dealing in obscure, military, objects. I mean, you don't find that anywhere other than here in London.
And it's something we've got to preserve.
Thank you guys so much. I mean, that's just incredible to think of.
Well, we've enjoyed it.
Collective history.
Yeah, we just, yeah.
And I think, there's oftentimes a slightly misplaced emphasis, and I say slightly because the product is incredible. I mean, you wear a pair of Bespoke shoes, you can't understand it until you actually have them on your feet, just how much better and more comfortable the shoes are. And so the product is incredible. I mean, the making, the finish, but there's a slightly misplaced emphasis on the product in that I think that one of the actual richest and most valuable aspects of the shoemaking process are the shoemakers. I mean, this idea that you can have a pair of shoes made by hand by someone that you can meet with and get to know and develop a relationship over the years, and then to have that be done the same way it's been done for over 100 years, to me is truly, I mean, that is true luxury in this day and age.
Yeah.
Is that, and I think that long after these shoes are gone, which hopefully won't be for a long time unless my kids have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
Long after these shoes are gone, it's the value of the relationships and these moments, and having a beer with you at the pub or the lunch that we're about to have, that I'll truly remember as being remarkable. Yeah. So
it's about
I think
the
it's
stories,
incredible.
and as we've always said, Bespoke is about the relationships. It's about the relationship between yourself and the maker, and they're important relationships.
Yeah.
And you spoke a bit earlier about just the longevity and this day and age, I mean, everyone is all very socially conscious and environmentally conscious.
Yeah.
I mean, this is sustainable, right? It's done by someone using 100% natural materials. It's done with integrity. If cared for and polished with Saphir Shoe Polish from KirbyAllison.com, they'll last, forever, and, only get better with age. So with that, shall we put them on my feet?
Yes, let's do that. We better.
I can't stare at them this long.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get these knots undone.
These black ones, I mean, they're my London shoes. We did a little bit of inking on these, right?
Yep, we did.
Which is, again, kind of an interesting
Just a different
variation
look,
in the style. And a slightly more pitched heel.
This is very much Jim's style
kind of West
making
End
here.
style.
Jim's style, so slightly straighter heel,
Fuller,
not so much inking. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Wow, feel these. I love to tell the story of that time I was in Paris, in Comte de Luca, in the changing room trying on a pair of trousers, and Julian De Luca is outside, waiting for me to get the trousers on, and I put the shoes on, and all you hear is this, the air rushing out, and he goes, the sound of a Bespoke pair of shoes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It was one of those moments. I was like,
Yeah, that's for sure.
You're right what you say about that if you've never had Bespoke
Thanks.
clothing or shoes before, until you have it, you don't realise the difference.
Yeah.
The closeness of the fit, I think it takes some people by surprise, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And some people don't actually like it, so you need to talk to the client as...
Wow. Oh, sorry. Keep on.
Talk to the client as to whether they like that closeness of fit. Not everybody likes it, but...
These are amazing. Yeah. Well, with that, let's go to lunch. Gentlemen,
let's go to lunch. Yes.
Dominic, thank you so much.
Well, it's welcome. Always
a pleasure. Jim,
Thanks, Kirby.
I've been waiting for so long to finally get you on the channel. And
enjoy them.
Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your stories.
Thank you as well.
And for all that you do for Bespoke Shoemaking.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Cheers. Great.
Yeah.